It started with a tire. A single blown-out tire on a trailer being towed down Highway 299 in Northern California. The steel rim hit the pavement, scraped the asphalt, and threw sparks into the dry brush along the road. That was July 23, 2018. 3 days later, those sparks would give birth to something the United States had never seen before. A tornado made of fire. Redding, California sits in the northern Sacramento Valley, squeezed between mountain ranges on either side. In the spring, the Pacific sends cool, damp air through the region. But by midsummer, that air changes completely. As it rolls down the eastern mountain slopes, it sheds its moisture. What reaches the valley floor is hot, bone-dry wind that sucks the life out of everything it touches. Soil, grass, trees, all of it turns into fuel. The summer of 2018 had been brutal. A prolonged drought from 2012 to 2016 had been followed by a brief wet period that encouraged thick vegetation growth across Northern California. By 2018, all that new growth had dried out. There was more fuel on the ground than there had been in years. And then came the heat wave. Temperatures in Redding hit 113 degrees Fahrenheit on July 26th. The air was so dry that the relative humidity dropped below 3.5%. The land around Redding was not just dry. It was a powder keg waiting for a match. And it already had one. After the tire blew out on July 23rd, the sparks from that steel rim ignited roadside brush near the Whiskeytown National Recreation Area. Firefighters called it the Carr Fire, named after the intersection where it began. For its first 2 days, the fire was large but manageable. Crews worked to cut containment lines through the steep hills west of Redding. Difficult terrain slowed them down, but the fire was behaving. It moved uphill, pushed by terrain, feeding on dry vegetation. Nothing unusual for crews who had fought fires here before. That changed on July 26th. A powerful weather system to the north sent strong winds racing southward. Those winds did not just fan the flames. They fundamentally changed what the fire was. By about 5:30 in the evening, the Carr Fire transitioned from a terrain-driven fire to a wind-driven fire. That is one of the most dangerous shifts a wildfire can make. When wind takes over, the fire stops following the landscape and starts following the air. It becomes faster, more unpredictable, and nearly impossible to contain. The fire exploded eastward and downhill, racing toward Redding at terrifying speed. It covered 3 miles in just 4 hours. It jumped the Sacramento River. Evacuation orders went out to 38,000 residents. Firefighters scrambled to keep up with a blaze that was now outrunning every response they had. As the fire accelerated, it was already claiming lives. Don Smith, an 81-year-old contract bulldozer operator from Pollock Pines, had been working to improve a fire line near the Spring Creek Reservoir. Around 5:50 that evening, the rapidly advancing Firefront overtook his position. A crew chief tried to reach him by radio, urging him to pull back. 2 firefighters attempted to reach him on foot but were forced back by the flames. 4 helicopters dropped water through the smoke around his last known location. The pilots had to guess. They could not see the ground. It was so hot that one helicopter's temperature warning light activated and it was forced to land. Hours later, a fire captain confirmed that Don Smith had not survived. At 81, he had refused to retire. His family said he loved to stay busy and loved helping people more than anything else. But something else was happening above the fire, something that very few people on the ground had ever seen, and none of them had a name for yet. As the fire burned with increasing intensity, it released enormous amounts of heat into the atmosphere. Massive columns of superheated gas and smoke shot upward into the sky. Around 7:20 in the evening, those columns punched through a layer of stable air above them and burst into the upper atmosphere. Within just 15 minutes, the updrafts doubled in height, rocketing from about 6 miles up to 12 miles above the Earth. They reached 39,000 feet, higher than commercial aircraft crews. At the top of that column, a massive cloud began to form. Scientists call it a pyrocumulonimbus, a fire-generated thunderstorm. The fire was no longer just burning on the ground. It was building its own weather system in the sky above it. As that cloud expanded, it stretched the column of air beneath it, concentrating rotation near the surface. Near the ground, wind shear, areas where air was blowing in sharply different directions at different heights, combined with the enormous updraft to organize that rotation into a tight, intensifying vortex. This was no longer a wildfire. It was becoming something else entirely. At approximately 7:30 that evening, a fire tornado touched down near the Land Park neighborhood of Redding. At its base, it measured 1,000 feet across. It reached an estimated height of 18,000 feet. The winds inside were estimated at 143 miles per hour, the equivalent of an EF3 tornado, and the temperature within the vortex reached an estimated 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the melting point of steel. It was the strongest tornado of any kind ever recorded in the history of California, and it was only the second true fire tornado ever scientifically documented anywhere in the world, after one observed during the 2003 Canberra bushfires in Australia. What it left behind looked nothing like a wildfire. Trees were stripped of their bark and snapped in half. The ground beneath the vortex was scoured clean, soil ripped from the earth the same way it would be under the most violent conventional tornadoes. Steel electrical transmission towers, engineered to withstand extreme loads, collapsed. A steel pipe was found wrapped around a tree. Homes that the fire itself had never touched were destroyed, roofs ripped off and walls blown outward by winds that had no business existing inside a wildfire. 3 bulldozer operators working nearby were suddenly caught in the vortex. Don Andrews, Terry Cummings, and Jimmy Jones all had their cab windows shatter simultaneously as burning rocks and debris bombarded their machines. One of them radioed dispatch. He told them his windows were blown out, his curtains were down, and he could not last much longer. He said everything around him was on fire. He asked the dispatcher to take down his wife's phone number. All 3 survived, but barely. Less than a mile from those bulldozers, a man named Jeremy Stoke was driving his truck down Buenaventura Boulevard. Jeremy was 37 years old. He was not a frontline firefighter that night. He was a fire prevention inspector with the Redding Fire Department, and his job that evening was to drive through neighborhoods and make sure people had gotten out safely. When the Carr Fire started on July 23rd, Jeremy had been on vacation with his family. He cut it short and came back to work because his city needed him. Jeremy had joined the Redding Fire Department in 2004 after graduating from the Fire Academy at Shasta College. He was also an instructor there, teaching search and rescue and auto extrication to the next generation of firefighters. He coached his son Caleb's Little League team. His wife Allison described him as a teddy bear you would not want to run into in a dark alley. At home, he would sit on the couch and let his young daughter Aubrey dress him up as a princess, complete with a tiara. He was that kind of father. At 7:39 that evening, with the fire tornado bearing down on his position, Jeremy radioed a mayday. He stated his location. He said he was getting burned over. 1 minute later, his transmission stopped. Jeremy Stoke was found in the early morning hours of July 27th. He became the first firefighter in documented history to lose his life to a fire tornado. His final act was making sure his neighbors had made it out of their homes. They had. He had not. In a quiet residential area on the northern edge of the fire's path, the tornado's wind field swept over homes that were nowhere near the fire line. Ed Bledsoe had left his house earlier that day for a doctor's appointment. His 70-year-old wife Melody was at home with their 2 great-grandchildren, 5-year-old James and 4-year-old Emily. Ed and Melody had been raising those children since they were born. Ed later said the family was never told to evacuate. While he was out, Melody called. She told him she could see the fire, and he needed to come home right now. Ed dropped everything and drove as fast as he could. But traffic in the fire zone was gridlocked. He abandoned his car and tried to run home on foot. He could not get through. His sons tried too. The heat was so intense it singed one son's hair and stole his breath. Ed got back in his car and sped through an alternate route, passing other vehicles in the dirt, but nothing worked. He could not reach his own home. In those final minutes, Ed got through on the phone one last time. His great-grandson James was on the line. The boy kept saying the fire was coming in the back door. He asked his grandpa to please come get him. Ed told him he was on his way, that he was right down the road. Emily got on and told her grandpa she loved him. Melody said the same, and then the call was over. When Ed was finally able to return, nothing was left. Melody had wrapped herself and the children in wet blankets. She was found covering them. She had done everything she could until the very end. 4-year-old Emily, her family said, lit up every room she walked into. 5-year-old James idolized his great-grandfather. He wanted to wear suspenders just like Ed. All he had asked for that Christmas was a toy chainsaw so he could help Grandpa with the yard work. In total, the fire tornado was on the ground for approximately 30 minutes. It directly claimed 4 lives. The Carr Fire as a whole took 8, destroyed over 1,600 structures, burned nearly 230,000 acres, and caused more than $1.6 billion in damage. It was not fully contained until August 30th, more than 5 weeks after that tire first blew out on Highway 299. In the scientific community, the event triggered immediate research. A study published in Geophysical Research Letters documented the fire tornado in detail. The researchers found that it formed through processes nearly identical to conventional tornado dynamics. It was not simply fire heat spinning debris in circles. It was a genuine atmospheric vortex generated by a fire-created supercell thunderstorm. The study also found that radar data had contained early indicators of the vortex forming, signals that could potentially be used to issue warnings in the future. Before July 26, 2018, the idea of a wildfire generating its own tornado was something most people would have called impossible. After Redding, it became something fire agencies across the American West now train for and watch for at the start of every fire season. The conditions that created it, the extreme heat, the drought, the wind shear, the dense, dry fuel, have not gone away. They come back every summer. Jeremy Stokes' name is now written into wildfire training materials across California. A foundation created in his honor provides scholarships to aspiring firefighters at Shasta College, the same school where he once studied and later taught. His son Caleb has since enrolled in the firefighting academy to carry on his father's legacy. Firefighters know how to fight fire. They know how to read wind. But before that evening in Redding, nobody had ever taught them how to survive a tornado made of both.